May you please be seated. Thank you, Major Roberts. This morning, as you arrived in the auditorium, you may have noticed an empty chair. This chair symbolizes members of the profession of arms who are missing from our midst. They are commonly called POWs or MIAs, but many call them brothers. Prisoners of war are soldiers who are captured and taken prisoner by the enemy and never repatriated during times of war. All too often, these casualties are forgotten. Sadly, the same can be said for those who are missing in action. Since World War I, more than 200,000 Americans have been listed as prisoners of war or missing in action. Less than half of them were returned at the end of hostilities, leaving more than 125,000 American servicemen missing in action since the beginning of World War I. Today, Don Redding will place the POW MIA chair cover that represents all veterans that are unaccounted for. Don was a flight engineer gunner on a B-24 bomber flying with the 15th Air Force out of Italy. On his 17th mission, December 11, 1944, his plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire over Vienna, Austria. His crew bailed out over the city of Vienna. The temperature that day at altitude was 60 degrees below zero. As he descended in his chute, the Germans shot at him most of the time he was in the air. Miraculously, all 10 of his crew survived and were together that night. He was taken to Oberusel Interrogation Center, and after a week on bread and water and threats of being turned over to the Gestapo or civilians, he was released and again reunited with his crewmates. He spent the next 5 months in Stalag 1, located in northern Germany off the Baltic Sea. After 5 months of surviving on little food and the coldest winter in 50 years, he was liberated by the Russian army. He was returned to Allied control at Camp Lucky Strike, France on May the 12th, 1945, and from there went to a warm welcome home. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are physically able, please rise for the placement of the covering, which will be followed by 30 seconds of silence. Thank you. Please be seated. Please welcome Brian Alexander, President and CEO of the National World War I Museum, to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Board of Trustees and staff, we welcome you to the National World War I Museum at Liberty Memorial on this very special day when we pay tribute to the brave veterans who serve our nation. Today it's my honor to introduce a very special guest. I'd like to recognize Andrew Jackson York, son of Sergeant Alvin York. Andrew? As you may know, Sergeant Alvin C. York of Pall Mall, Tennessee became the most decorated United States soldier in World War I. And his heroism is heralded forever through the popular movie Sergeant York, starring Gary Cooper. And Cooper's daughter, Maria Cooper Janis, is also with us today. Sergeant York's battlefield exploits on October 8, 1918 earned him the Medal of Honor, the highest military designation awarded by the United States government. The Medal of Honor citation read, "Fearlessly leading 7 men, he charged with great daring a machine gun nest, which was pouring deadly and incessant fire upon his platoon. In this heroic feat, the machine gun nest was taken, together with 4 officers and 128 men and several guns." Please help me in welcoming the son of a great American hero to the National World War I Museum, Andrew Jackson. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Representative Emanuel Cleaver of the 5th Congressional District, a great friend of the National World War I Museum. Congressman?
Good morning. It is an honor and a privilege to salute all our veterans, not only on Veterans Day, but on many days. Our country's proud history is woven with the sacrifice of veterans who pledged allegiance to this nation, and they took their allegiance beyond words and put it into practice and sacrifice. From the very beginning of our revolution, this nation has experienced the hardships of war. The Great War, as it was called, brought us into an era of international conflict. After World War I, it was the citizens from the heart of America who honored our veterans by banding together to build this Liberty Memorial. The eternal flame is a reminder of the price of war and the human strife that comes with conflict, lest the ages forget. The historical monument continues to serve as a national and international reminder of a noble attempt to end all wars. In attendance at the 1921 dedication at this site were 200,000 people without a PA system. 5 Allied commanders were here, including our own General John J. Pershing, Vice President Calvin Coolidge, and Captain Harry S. Truman. This memorial was the only memorial built to honor the veterans of World War I. On the Great Mall in Washington is a monument to every war except World War I. The District of Columbia did build a small monument, but it has inscribed on it, for those of you who have not seen it, this monument built by the people of D.C. It is not a national World War I monument. It is a city World War I monument. The National Park Service and the architects of the Capitol concluded that the mall is already too congested to build another monument. But thank God for the people of this great metropolitan area who came together and raised money to build this monument. There was no federal grant or no stimulus dollars. The people built this monument. Our foreparents built this monument. We've had a difficult time trying to get things done. In 1994, during my term as mayor, something very, very painful happened. For the first time, the Liberty Memorial was closed. I journeyed to Washington, D.C., made an appeal to the National Park Service to take over the monument. They very politely declined. And so, again, the people of this community responded when we put a ballot measure on to try to rebuild this monument. People like Ollie Gates, B. Davis, Carl DeCapo, former mayors Berkeley and Wheeler, joined with the Liberty Memorial Association and the Kansas City, Missouri Park Board to begin a process of rebuilding this memorial. We passed the asset sales tax, and again, the people stood up. We cannot overlook the fact that Crosby Kemper energized the effort with a $2 million pledge to lead the funding from private citizens. On this past week, a bill which I had introduced and struggled with was finally brought to the floor of the United States House of Representatives for a vote. That bill was approved. The bill names the Liberty Memorial of Kansas City, Missouri as the National World War I Monument. I want to thank my colleague Sam Graves, who worked to make sure that there were no negative votes, because only one-third of the House was needed to defeat it. And he took care of his side of the aisle. I took care of our side of the aisle, and we had only one negative vote. The measure now moves to the U.S. Senate, where my longtime friend, Senator Bond and Claire McCaskill, are pushing it through the House. We will have a hearing within the next 2 weeks. Brian Alexander and I will testify on the Senate side, and my great anticipation is that it will pass the Senate and will move to the desk of the President of the United States for signing. The only place after that signing that people in this country or in this world can come for a legitimate World War I monument appreciation is right here in Kansas City, Missouri. We should never, ever, 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 ever forget those who sacrificed in World War I. And let me just add, before I close, we should never forget the fighting men and women who fought in wars from the beginning of this republic to today. We had 2,000 people to show up this past August on the lawn of the Harry Truman Library to honor over 600 Vietnam veterans. It's long overdue. We should have done it a long time ago, but we've done it now. And it would be my hope, it would be my commitment to do everything I can do, as you will do, to make sure that the sacrifices, the men and women who preserved this nation, is never forgotten. Thank you.
I'd like to bring to the podium now the mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, the Honorable Mark Funkhausen.
Thank you. Good morning. We are here today to pay homage to veterans. And when I think about veterans, I always think of my own father, who served in World War II. And recently, he had passed about 3 or 4 years ago, and recently I came across his autobiography, and I read it, and I was struck for the first time at how young he was when he had went to the war. He was born in 1926, and he went into the service and went overseas immediately in 1944. He was 17 or 18, and he was home in 1946 at 20. I've got a 20-year-old son. I cannot imagine sending him across the ocean to fight the Nazi War Museum. And what came home to me may have seemed obvious to you. Veterans are old. When I think of veterans, I think of old people. People my age. But soldiers are young. And recently, we got involved here in Kansas City in an effort to end homelessness. They have a plan in Denver where they have a 10-year plan to end homelessness, and you wouldn't think that you could do that, but it seems to be working, and I got involved, I got drugged into, really, a coalition of folks who were working here in Kansas City on that issue. And I was stunned to find how many hundreds and hundreds of the homeless here in Kansas City are veterans. Think about that. That is so odd that this nation would have its veterans be homeless, and so wrong. And so as we pay homage today to veterans, I hope you will wish us good luck and join us in the plan to end homelessness here in Kansas City. It's something we can do to pay homage to our veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to acknowledge additional dignitaries who are with us today. Representing Senator Claire McClaskill is Corey Dillon. Representing Senator Kit Bond, Michael Collins. State Representative Mike Brown. Kansas City, Missouri Councilwoman Deb Herman. Brigadier General Edward C. Cardone, Acting Commander, Combined Arms Center and Fort Leavenworth. President of the Parks and Recreation Commissioners, Commissioner John Fierro. And Chairman of the National World War I Board, Tim Crystal. Please welcome now Carl DiCapo, Special Assistant to the President and CEO of the National World War I Museum, who will now recognize the Walk of Honor. Carl?
I could be here all day and listen to that man speak. I get excited, not that I'm normally not excited. But let me go back a little bit. When Morgan asked me to speak about the Walk of Honor today, I was thrilled. Why? Because the fact that I was here when it started, and I want to go back just in history a little bit. When this was in disarray, as Mayor Cleaver said, in 1998, we went to him and asked if he would put it on the ballot. He said, I'm thinking that the people will do this, but you have to raise some seed money. So we raised the money, he put it on the ballot, we won overwhelmingly, and that's what you have today. Now, who did he appoint? A young man by the name of Jerry Cohen, who was a perennial chairman of the Mayor's Christmas Tree, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he put him in charge of the brick sales. Well, it started off real slow in 1998, but in 1999 it just expanded and went crazy. Why is that? Why is that? Individuals, families, companies, organizations, for the love of their people, for their honor of their people, they bought bricks. Moms, dads, sisters, brothers, anyone, all of them. I've got the people from Rotary in here, the veterans, the POWs, you know, and I think about my boy Jack Stites at this point. He bought thousands of bricks for the people. Anybody who went to the VA hospital had to buy a brick, but we sold thousands of them. Now, what is a brick? It's a stone with a name on it. What does that mean? It's more than that. It's much, much more than that. In the last 3 years, over 1 million people have used this facility, inside and out, 1 million people. And they come by buses and cabs, by cars, by bicycles, and the first thing they do, they stop up at the Walk of Honor. And what do? They read. They read the inscriptions, they read the things, they read the thoughts of everyone there. As you saw today, when I went outside, there must have been 300 people reading the bricks. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's an old saying that if you are remembered, you will never die. If you are remembered, you will never die. There are 7,500 people there at the Walk of Honor that will never die. They will be here eternity, because we will remember them, and what a great place to do it on the National Monument. Today we honor the 185 men and women that purchased bricks for their loved ones. We're thrilled to death that you did that in their honor. And ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand so we can honor these people that have bought bricks today for the 7,500. We've got now 7,600 people. Would you stand in their honor, please? Thank you so very much for everything you do for the Indians of Oregon. God bless. God bless you to you. Thank you so much.
Today's keynote address is given by Dr. Jim Wilbanks, who is currently the Director, Department of Military History at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Dr. Wilbanks received his master's and PhD in history from the University of Kansas. He also graduated from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College and has a master's in military arts and science from the U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies. He has a master's of science from the University of Central Texas and a bachelor's degree in history from Texas A&M. Yes, he's a proud Aggie. Dr. Wilbanks is a retired lieutenant colonel who served as an infantry officer in the U.S. Army from 1969 until 1992. In 1971 and 72, he served honorably in Vietnam as an advisor to the Royal Thai Army and the Army of South Vietnam. He has written numerous publications about the Vietnam War, including the Vietnam War Almanac, the Tet Offensive, A Concise History, the Battle of An Loc, 1972, and Abandoning Vietnam, How America Left and South Vietnam Lost Its War. Dr. Wilbanks has received many military awards and decorations, including the Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star with Oak Leaf Cluster and V device, the Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster, and the Combat Infantryman's Badge. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Jim Wilbanks.
Thanks for that kind introduction. As I walked up here, I considered what my granddaughter, as we got in the car to come over here, said. She looked at my speech and she said, "That looks awfully long." So I perhaps didn't cut it back too bad, but hopefully it won't take too long. I am really deeply honored to be here to help pay homage to my brothers and sisters in arms who have served this great nation. It is fitting and proper that we stand here today in this magnificent facility that commemorates World War I. The Great War was fought from 1914 to 1918. During this great conflagration, the Allied powers defeated the Central Powers, but not before 70 million military personnel were mobilized in one of the largest and bloodiest wars in history. And more than 15 million people died in the 4 years of bitter fighting. Finally, on the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, German leaders signed an armistice with the Allied powers and the guns fell silent. On that day, November the 11th, celebrations were held in New York City, Paris, London, and in other cities around the globe. The following year, President Woodrow Wilson declared November the 11th as Armistice Day, a day to observe the ending of World War I. On May 13th, 1938, Congress passed an act making Armistice Day a national holiday. Initially, Armistice Day was to be a day to honor veterans of the Great War. And had that war indeed been the war to end all wars, the holiday might still be called Armistice Day. However, the dream that the end of the Great War would issue in a lasting peace was shattered in 1939 when World War II broke out, requiring the greatest mobilization of American soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and Coast Guardsmen in this nation's history. Shortly after the end of that horrific war, which claimed the lives of over 400,000 Americans, Congressman Edward H. Reese of Kansas introduced legislation to change the name of Armistice Day to Veterans Day in order to honor all veterans who had served in the armed forces of the United States in time of war. On June 1st, 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed a bill officially changing Armistice Day to Veterans Day. A law passed in 1968 changed the national commemoration of Veterans Day to the fourth Monday in October. It soon became apparent, however, after a large hue and cry, that November the 11th was a date of lasting historic significance to many Americans. Consequently, in 1978, Congress returned the observance of Veterans Day to its original date. So on this day, in this month, at this hour, our nation remembers the moment when the guns of World War I went silent, and we mark that event by recognizing the service and the sacrifice of our nation's veterans. Those who have worn the uniform of the United States have borne the cost of America's wars, and they have stood watch over America's peace. Since the founding of our country, some 48 million men and women have served in the uniform of the United States of America. Present here today are military veterans from World War II, the Cold War era, Korea, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf War, and the ongoing campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. We welcome all of you, and we thank you for your service and for being here today. Not every veteran has known the full fury of battle, but all who have worn the nation's uniform have served to protect the peace and the continued existence of this great nation, contributing to the advancement of human freedom and liberty in the process. Most of those who have served count their time in uniform among the defining experience of their lives. The military drew out the best that was in them, instilling the highest standards of service, discipline, and loyalty. There is a bond joining every veteran from every branch of service, whether drafted or enlisted, commissioned or non-commissioned, active duty, reserve, or National Guard, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, or Coast Guard. Each took an oath, lived by a code, and stood ready to fight and die for their country in times of peace and war. In recognizing the contributions of our veterans, the official Veterans Day proclamation commemorates those who have served using the words selfless consecration to the service of the country. This is a grand phrase and entirely appropriate. The military life is built around sacrifice and complete devotion to the country. The essence of this service is commitment to a greater cause. There is no mystery behind the endurance and the success of American liberty and freedom. It is because in every generation from the Revolutionary period to this very hour, brave Americans have stepped forward and made the selfless consecration to service mentioned in the proclamation. They went forth to defend the nation and its ideals, giving up the comforts and the conveniences of home. Too many never returned to their families, but none who served ever sacrificed in vain. On this Veterans Day, we give special thanks for the 24 million Americans who answered the nation's call and still walk among us, continuing to strengthen our nation with their example of service and sacrifice. Who are these people? The ranks of our veterans are drawn from many generations and many backgrounds. They are our colleagues and friends, our neighbors and family members. They are our fathers and mothers, our sisters and brothers, our sons and daughters. Some charged across great battlefields, some fought on the high seas, some patrol the depths of the world's oceans, while others patrol the open skies. They are veterans in their 80s who served under MacArthur and Eisenhower and helped save the world from tyranny. Still others, like my father, who served with the 15th Infantry Regiment, fought in the bitter cold of Korea. Others fought in the stifling heat of the jungles of Vietnam. Many other veterans remember the Cold War vigil, during which they served in lonely outposts around the world, from the DMZ in Korea to the Fulda Gap in Germany. Yet others participated in a swift conflict in the First Persian Gulf War, or served in peacekeeping missions from the Sinai to Bosnia. Some of our veterans, like our son who just returned from a tour in Iraq with the 4th Infantry Division, are young men and women with recent memories of battles in mountains and in deserts. In Afghanistan, these brave Americans helped sweep away a vicious tyranny allied with terror and prepared the way for our free people to elect its own leaders. In Iraq, our men and women fought a ruthless enemy of America, setting the Iraqi people free from a murderous tyrant. Some of tomorrow's veterans are serving in Iraq and Afghanistan at this very hour. Today's young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen are performing magnificently in unbelievably difficult and challenging conditions. Just 3 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go to Afghanistan, and I got a chance to observe our sons and daughters as they went about the deadly business of taking the war to the Taliban. They have a clear mission to defeat the terrorists and aid the rise of a free government that can defend its own people. They serve a great cause, and they uphold a noble and proud tradition handed down to them by the Americans who went before them, upon whose shoulders they stand. Like those who went before them, they are accomplishing their mission with skill and with honor. They are making us proud, and they deserve every amount of support that we can give them. Today, as we honor those who have worn the uniform of this great nation, we must also pause to recall the men and women who did not live to be called veterans, including those who did not make it home from the battlefront and remain missing to this day. The families of the lost carry a burden of grief that time will lighten but will never lift. Our nation honors these patriots who place duty and country before their own lives. It is also appropriate at this time to remember our fallen comrades who were killed and wounded in the horrendous shooting at Fort Hood last week. Our hearts and prayers go out to the survivors and to the grieving families of those we lost. Today, the nation is proud of those who have served in uniform, both living and those who are no longer with us. Our veterans have made our nation a safer place in a world full of new dangers. Their actions have also upheld the ideals of America's founding, which defines us still. Our nation values freedom, not just for ourselves, but for all. And because Americans have been and continue to be willing to serve and sacrifice in this cause, our nation remains the greatest force for good among all the nations of this earth. Today, we have talked about the service of our veterans while in uniform, but it is still also important to note that long after their honorable discharges and taking off the uniform for the last time, our veterans still symbolize what it means to be a citizen. Go to any community in the country and you will find veterans in positions of service and leadership. In so many ways, veterans live out the meaning of patriotism, idealism, and concern for others. Those of us who are the children and grandchildren of veterans have seen these qualities up close. Each of us is better because of the influence of a veteran, and so is America. Our veterans neither ask for nor expect any special thanks for what they have done. They were just happy to have the opportunity to serve their nation. Yet, what our veterans have given the country is beyond our power to fully repair. So today, the nation pauses to recognize the debt owed to their service and sacrifice. We also recognize the sacrifice made by their families, the true unsung heroes, who stayed behind when duty called, but provided support that kept their loved ones going, even in the roughest of times. In closing, our hearts are filled with respect and admiration for those who have served and those who continue to serve this great nation. On this day, we honor every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, and Coast Guardsman who came forward, whether in times of war or peace, to answer the nation's call, helping to preserve freedom and our way of life. May God bless our veterans and their families. May God bless those who still wear the uniform. May God bless those who still suffer the wounds of war. And may God continue to bless this great country. Thank you.
Now from the American Legion Band, the Armed Forces Medley. Please stand when you hear your anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the benediction and the removal of the POWMIA cover. And if able, please remain standing for the placing of the wreath honoring our fallen comrades. And please stay seated until the wreath has been removed from the room.
Please join me for prayer. Let us pray. Almighty God, once again we thank you for this great day of celebration and honor as you recognize and pay tribute to our veterans who have answered the call to service and sacrifice for our nation. We give thanks for all who have served and serve this very moment in harm's way. And we ask you to provide protection, wisdom, and comfort in times of testing, sorrow, and loneliness. Father, I pray that you challenge each of us here in such a way as to better serve our families and nation for the betterment of our country. Keep each of us in your care, both now and the days to come. For we ask these things in your great name. Amen.
Present arms. There, arms. Present arms.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's event. Thank you for honoring our veterans with your presence.